funding for a violation by a public school. Chair offers a committee substitute and recognizes Representative Schatzline to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm honored to lay out House Bill 1655 today. HB 1655 ensures that public school employees are prohibited from assisting or facilitating the social transitioning of any student. That means not changing names or pronouns, not hiding information from parents, and not perpetuating mental illness and leading children down a path that could lead to irreversible harm. We must make it unmistakably clear: schools are not places for secret agendas or social experiments on our kids. They are places for education, not indoctrination. A recent study published by the Journal of American Academy of Pediatrics examined the 5-year gender identity development trajectory of transgender identified children who underwent early social gender transition. The children were on average 6 to 7 years old at the time. 5 years later, at the average age of 11 to 12, almost all, 97.5%, continue to identify as transgender, including a small subset developing a non-binary identification. And only 2.5% of the children desisted from transgender identification by the end of the study period. However, 11 other studies have been conducted looking at whether gender dysphoria persists throughout childhood. And on average, 80% of children change their minds and do not continue into adulthood as transgender. And one of the major factors in the difference between the 80% who changed their mind is that they were by and large not socially transitioned. Why is that important, you may ask? While research is limited, we know that the presence of gender dysphoria leads to a higher risk of suicide attempts. The National Institute of Health did a study that involved 56 U.S. healthcare organizations. The results were clear that patients who had a history of gender affirmation surgery had a 12.12 times greater risk of suicide attempts versus patients who had no history of gender affirmation surgeries. Members, it's important to note that this bill does not ban the study of gender identity in our schools. That's the goal of SB 12, and while I support SB 12, this bill simply bans the most harmful aspects of teaching gender identity to children, the social transitioning of our most vulnerable. In many cases, this body debates controversial issues like biological men and women's sports, protecting the unborn. Oftentimes, Republicans and Democrats can find common ground over the most extreme scenarios. For example, while we may not all agree on when life begins, we mostly agree that partial birth abortion is evil. Members, socially transitioning our vulnerable youth is an example of one of the extreme scenarios that we should be able to agree on. We've seen a troubling rise in what society calls gender-affirming care, but let's be honest, what's being affirmed is confusion, not truth. In some cases, teachers have been encouraged to withhold information from moms and dads. This is not compassion, it's deception, and it's anti-parental rights, and it's the perpetuation of mental illness. In fact, in response to a controversy at Bel Air High School in Houston, Governor Greg Abbott has ordered the Texas Education Agency to investigate allegations that staff were involved in the unauthorized social transitioning of a student. HB 1655 draws a line in the sand. If a school violates this policy and participates in social transitioning, they will be held accountable, as they should. Taxpayer dollars should never be used to sever the sacred bond between parent and child. Our children don't need confusion, they need clarity. They don't need gender ideology, they need identity rooted in truth. We have witnesses, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I would also like to reserve my right to close.
All right, thank you very much. Let the record reflect Representative Bryant, Dutton, and Hinojosa have joined us on the dais. Members, any questions for the bill author? Yes, Representative Hinojosa.
I don't understand. I'm sorry, I don't have the bill language in front of me. So what do you mean?
You want to
by
clarify?
Yeah, give me an example of what you mean by this.
Yeah, and it's a good question. I think, so I mentioned Governor Abbott addressed a specific case in Houston. So this is a situation where a child might have gender dysphoria, and they walk into a school, and rather than, being honest with that child about, hey, you're struggling with gender dysphoria, let's bring your parents into this situation. We've seen as teachers have stepped in and begin to call this child by their preferred pronouns, have begun to perpetuate the ideology that this child might have, and many times against the will of the parent or without the knowledge of parents even knowing that this is taking place within the confines of their own child's school. We have witnesses that are going to confirm that today.
So does your bill specify that this cannot happen with does your bill only speak to referring to a child by their preferred pronouns if the parents aren't aware
No,
or
this-
engaged?
no,
Okay,
this
so
bill-
this is not about parental rights?
Well,
You're-
it
You're
is.
setting aside parental rights and you're deciding what the relationship should be like between teacher, student, and what the parents prefer in this
It's
situation?
without a doubt about parental rights, and the reason that it is because we want to leave those conversations up to parents. We want for teachers to be free of having those conversations and just saying, hey, this isn't something we should be discussing in the classroom. This is something they can discuss at home with their mom or dad.
But you're not allowing a parent to tell a teacher, our kid's going through something right now, we're trying to figure it out. Will you please, as part of what we're trying to do, refer to a child, for instance, by their preferred pronouns?
Yeah, we don't believe in lying to students.
Okay, so that was not what I asked you. I asked you, so you're going to prohibit that? You're going to prohibit a teacher from working with a parent to, for instance, this pronoun problem that you've identified?
I definitely believe that teachers should be honest with students.
Okay, I'm not sure the dishonesty in parents working with teachers to make a child
Sure.
feel
Yeah.
comfortable through something they're going through. But
Well,
let me
and
ask
the
this, can I
question-
just
well,
ask this question?
sure,
What's the
sure.
consequence, do you have a consequence in your bill?
It gives the Attorney General prosecutorial
Oh, so we're going to have
authority.
prosecute teachers again. I see. Thank you.
You bet.
Question.
Chairman Dutton.
Thank you. As a lawyer, let me ask this question. It says assisting a student with social transitioning. What does assist mean?
Perpetuating it through saying, okay, it's possible that there are more than two sexes. Going along with that ideology, encouraging other students to call this student by preferred pronouns, essentially enabling this behavior, which we see 80% of students turn away from that behavior when they're not socially transitioned.
Yeah, well, my question has to do with, for example, if the teacher gave the student a ride home, would that be assisting?
I don't believe that would be covered under this bill.
What would be assisting, though? That's what I'm trying to get at. What would a teacher, how would we tell a teacher that they're prevented from doing this because that's assisting?
Well, it would be assisting within gender ideology. Wouldn't be just assisting a student. You can assist a student under your official duties as a teacher.
Well, but your bill says from keep them prohibiting school employees from assisting a student.
Yes, assisting a student within gender ideology.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. What does that mean? What, as a lawyer, what would I tell the teachers I represent that means?
Well, I wouldn't tell you to tell them to not assist a student. I would say that this refers directly to assisting a student with social transitioning. It doesn't refer. For example, a teacher can continue to assist a student in educational needs. The teacher can assist a student in any way that the law permits currently to assist in educational outcomes.
So, for example, teaching a student reading,
Yep, that
or
would not
teaching
be
English, would that
be prohibited.
okay? And again, the consequences, the penalty in the bill is that the Attorney General would pursue criminal penalties?
It would be civil.
And what would the penalty be?
That would be for the courts to decide.
So
So-
you don't specify in the bill?
I don't. It's civil liability. The Attorney General can file a suit against the district and take it from there.
And what would happen? I mean, would the school district defend the suit? Would the teacher
that's correct.
defend the suit?
It would be the school district.
So the taxpayers would have to pay for the defense.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is de-incentivize teachers doing any type of harmful ideology and keeping these ideologies outside of the classrooms of being pushed on kids.
Well, I understand that.
yeah.
I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just trying to figure out, what do I say to teachers that what conduct is prohibited, and if they engage in it, what would be the
Sure,
penalty
yeah,
for
no,
it.
I think any type of educational responsibility that a teacher has right now is not going to be prohibited by this bill.
So if a teacher gave something that was counter to this social transitioning,
Well, and I'll tell you this, and I think it's important to note, I mean, and I kind of hit on this, my bill is not SB 12, so it doesn't actually limit the talking about gender identity inside the classroom. This is a bill that's targeting working directly against either the will of the parent or perpetuating something that's just simply not true.
well, I understand that, but what I'm getting at is that the bill seems to be broad enough that it excludes conduct by the teacher. If the teacher were against social transitioning, the teacher still couldn't talk to the student about that because this bill prohibits it.
It definitely prohibits social transitioning.
Well, but what about in the alternative? If the teacher were saying, look, I don't think you ought to be thee and they and them, or you ought to be,
Sure.
that would seem to fit within the context of this bill.
So what you're saying, just to clarify, is the concern is if they have a alternative perspective and would like to tell that student that they, should not be believing this ideology. Your concern is that the teacher would then be subject to litigation. Is that the idea?
Well, I'm saying that the bill seems to prohibit that.
Well, I absolutely believe, and I think to your point, I absolutely believe these are conversations that should happen within the confines of a home and should not be
Correct,
conversations
correct.
that are
Well,
stirred
I
in
agree.
the
I don't think
classroom.
anybody's disagreeing with that, but what I'm saying is that the bill seems to prohibit both pro and con assisting a student.
Assisting them in assisting them in what, I guess, is
In the
what I'm
social
asking.
transitioning.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. That's what this bill is about.
So you're trying to prohibit the teacher from having any conduct, even pro or con, in regards to social transitioning.
Yeah, I personally don't believe that, and I think many of my colleagues agree that this conversation shouldn't be in the classroom. It should be between a parent and the child.
So if the teacher thinks that's conduct that should not be engaged in by the student, you would prohibit them from talking to the student even about that?
I guess I'd need you to define what conduct we're talking about.
Well, I'm talking about the social transition.
Well, the reason that I ask is because if a student is taking an action that's going to lead to disciplinary issues, behavioral issues, then absolutely not. This would not prohibit a teacher from having that conversation. But if we're discussing, a teacher engaging in a conversation about the personal sexuality or gender ideology of that student, yeah, I don't believe that they should be able to engage in it.
I mean, let me close with this. The Ten Commandments is thou shalt not, okay? A bunch of thou shalt nots. If the teacher said you should not engage in this conduct, that would seem to be prohibited by your bill because that could be termed assisting the student.
No, it wouldn't. And the reason that it wouldn't is because this bill does not ban the speaking of any hypothetical situation. This bill bans specifically assisting in socially transitioning children. So no right of a teacher to educate is being taken away inside this class or inside this bill. What's being touched on is a one-on-one scenario or a situation where a student is directly being spoken to about their situation as it relates to social transitioning.
And even if the teacher finds that social transitioning harmful, the teacher would be prohibited from talking about it.
That's
according to
correct.
your bill.
This is a situation where we just believe that conversation should be between a parent and a child.
All right, thank you.
Is there any more questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Bryant.
Well, suppose there is a conversation between the parent and the child about this. I have met with parents of these children, and I can't imagine a more difficult dilemma than they face. Gender dysphoria is a real thing, and with the advice of experts, they had to make a decision about which way to go. So suppose that's happened, and the parent says to the teacher, my child is to be identified as a male. And the teacher says, okay, I'm going to use male pronouns. Is the teacher now in trouble?
The teacher should, without a doubt, speak the truth inside of a classroom and should not perpetuate a lie.
Well, wait a minute. This bill says a teacher's in trouble if they assist. And the parents, who you say their opinion should be primary here,
Yep.
comes to the teacher and says, we've been through counseling, we've made a decision. This child is to be called with pronouns that are male pronouns. May the teacher use the male pronouns?
They will not under this bill.
They cannot.
No.
So you're all for parents, their opinion being primary unless those opinions differ with your ideology.
Well, this
Right,
bill.
you mentioned the word ideology
Let me
numerous
ask you a
times.
question in response, because
Yeah.
I think it's valid. Do you believe that there are more than two sexes?
I didn't say there were more than two sexes, Mr. Schatzline. I said if a child is one sex and the parents go to the teacher and say, you're to call that child with male pronouns, is the teacher in a jam?
Yeah, they are. And the reason is
Okay.
because we don't believe that we should
So let's
perpetuate
stop
lies in
talking
the
about
classroom.
parents. Let's stop talking about parents' opinions and the
Well,
parents'
here's what I'll
views
say to you,
being primary.
Representative,
Because
and
if
I
the
think
parents'
I think it's
opinions
important here.
don't agree, I'm asking the
you're
questions
going
up
to
here.
hear
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to
some
have order.
testimony.
if I
Hold
may.
up, just 1 second. Let's have a back and forth. Let's not
You
talk
bet.
over each
You bet.
other.
Go ahead.
So
So the point I'm making is that if the parent's opinion disagrees with your ideology, then the parent's opinion is no longer primary. So let's don't talk a whole bunch about how important and sacred it is to listen to the parents if you're not going to really listen to the parents.
Well, I do not believe that we should tell lies to children or perpetuate lies in the classroom, which is what this seeks to do. And what you're going to hear today in testimony is examples of parents who were undermined, even though they wanted to tell their child the truth. Their child was not told the truth inside of their classroom.
Okay.
And so what we're going to see is that we have teachers, counselors, you name it, that are saying things that are not true to children, oftentimes against the will of the child, against the will of the parents, which is what we're speaking to. But I do believe that we should tell the truth. Look, we tell uncomfortable truths in the classroom all the time.
Okay.
Let me just finish. We tell uncomfortable truths in the classroom all the time. Uncomfortable truths about whether it's our nation's history, uncomfortable truths about different things that we might have to say in the classroom because it's true. And this is an important aspect of education, is just simply telling the truth. Look, if we're
wait a
telling
minute.
lies to children, then at what point does it end? At what point are we able to say, well, there's absolutely no such thing as truth or as a lie? Look, this is just simply giving the facts to a child. If a child goes home and a parent wants to say that they are not the biological sex that they were born into, that's the parent's right to do so. We do not believe that teachers or counselors should be forced into doing that at the same time inside of the classroom.
Look, that's a great filibuster, but you went off talking about history and all kind of other stuff, national history and all kind of other stuff. Your bill says a teacher is in trouble and a school district is in trouble if they, and it's your word, assist in this area. As Mr. Dutton pointed out, who knows what that means? And I'm asking if the parent, whose opinion you said is primary, after they've gone through counseling and everything else, says to the teacher, this child is to be addressed with male pronouns, if the teacher is not supposed to do what the parent says. And you're saying no, because your ideology says that they shouldn't. So how are we going to sort this out if this bill passes?
Well, it's not my ideology, it's science. So I
No.
think when we're looking
I
at
don't
it,
think so.
we're talking about
Yeah.
scientific facts. So you're absolutely right. I do not believe that teachers should be forced into saying something that's not a scientific fact to a child or assisting in perpetuating any type of mental illness, any type of non-truth that a parent is claiming that they want to push on their child, which is their right to do. And so, yeah, I do not agree that.
Well, I sincerely hope that you never have to face the dilemma of the families that I've met with
You're going to hear some
who did
today. You're
not
going to
know
hear
what
some
to do.
testimony today.
and had to finally deal with the advice given to them by experts and had to go forward. It's a tough situation. It's not, in my opinion, it's not right for you to be judging those people with these kinds of bills.
Okay?
Excuse me, Representative Hinojosa.
I want to just reemphasize, it's not just that a teacher is in trouble, it's that a teacher is subject to prosecution, is my understanding, under this bill substitute. You keep giving examples of parents who weren't on board with what the teachers were doing, but that's not what your bill does. Your bill is criminalizing, I guess, teachers just trying to work with parents to deal with what you acknowledged is not a lie, but a real issue of gender dysphoria. And so do you believe that if a parent is struggling with a child with gender dysphoria, and I also know, in fact, the PTA president of my son's elementary school had to deal with this, and the struggle was real. Parents are learning, kids are learning, and they, to Representative Bryant's point, seek the advice of professionals to figure it out. If a child is suicidal because of all the confusion and all that they're dealing with, and a parent asks a teacher, hey, we're dealing with this right now, can you just help me? Can you just help me? And maybe it's a pronouns issue. I don't know what it might be. You're saying that's just not allowed. Is that what you're saying with that? Not just allowed, that's a criminal offense to be prosecuted by the Attorney General.
Yeah, so I'll speak to this because I think your question is an honest one, and I think I completely respect the sentiment behind it because it is heartbreaking. I do believe that this is a challenge for parents. What I also know is that the data is clear, is that when we look at this social transitioning, we don't see better results on the other end of it. In fact, one of the reasons that this...
I want to make
let me
sure
just
you
finish.
understand.
I'm trying to
That's not the
answer your
question.
question.
That's
Yeah,
not the
no,
question.
I'm answering it. I'm getting there. So one of the reasons that we banned gender transition surgeries for minors last session was because we know that it did not yield the results that led to a less... I'm answering your question, if you'd just be patient with me getting there. That it did not yield the results of taking a student and ensuring that they had a lesser chance of committing suicide. In the same way, what we're prioritizing right now is the truth, because there is no empirical data that tells us that calling a child by their preferred pronouns or by perpetuating this through social transitioning leads to higher quality of life, leads to this child being in a healthier state. Well, in fact, we see the opposite in the studies that I just referenced. And so your question is, do I believe that this law would essentially allow teachers to be prosecuted for perpetuating a lie? And the answer is yes.
And again, it's not perpetuating a lie. You said gender dysphoria, you acknowledged, is real. So it's a real condition
I
that
do acknowledge
families
that.
are working through. I want to speak to a part of the back and forth you had with Chairman Dutton. You said to him something like, you'll have to define the conduct you're talking about. That is the real problem with this bill, because this cavalier thrown around of prosecuting teachers for this very vague word of assisting, that even it's your bill, sir.
Yep.
You don't define. It's not for Chairman Dutton to define. That's precisely his point. You have teachers in the classroom who we keep passing bills where they're afraid to just be in a classroom with teachers because we keep criminalizing behaviors that they don't want to have anything to do with. But when you put this vague language out there that subjects our teachers to criminal prosecution by the Attorney General, that's problematic. And it creates this chilling effect. It adds on to this chilling effect of teachers feeling like they have to police every action and every word when the vast, majority, in fact, every child that's ever taught any of my children are all about doing their best for students. That is fundamentally a problem I have with this.
Sure, and I completely understand. I'll just respond to that by saying one of the reasons that this bill is so important is we want to make sure that teachers know that it is not their responsibility to weigh in on these issues. It's actually their responsibility to not weigh in on these issues and focus on education in the classroom. And so to your point, I want to relieve the burden of those teachers to weigh in on these issues altogether and just say simply, this is not my area. This is for a mom or dad.
This bill doesn't say it is not the job of teachers to socially transition. Your bill says they can be your bill says they can be prosecuted. That's very different. Please, I don't think we should mislead the public about what your bill says. Your bill says teachers should be prosecuted.
I believe if they are socially transitioning children, absolutely.
Yeah. Let the record show Representative Cunningham's on the dais. Chair recognizes Chairman Leach.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Schatzline. I know your heart and trust that your intent in bringing this bill is sincere and pure and from a good place. I think we want to, and you are, treat a conversation like this with the care and caution it deserves. And our committee, including the members you've already heard from, is very, very careful in conversations like this. This isn't adversarial. We, at least, I'm just going to speak for me, when we talk about issues like this, or when we talk about education generally, public education, my default has always been that parents are in charge. That we are, by virtue of me sending my children for 8 hours a day to public schools, I am inviting the public schools into my relationship with my children, into my family, and asking for them to partner with me in raising up my children. And our teachers, and I think the vast, vast majority of teachers are committed to that, partnering with parents. My concern with a bill like this is not the intent, because I do agree with you. My concern is the chilling effect that it will have upon a teacher's deference to parents. And I wonder, I'm concerned that possibly an unintended consequence is that the rights of parents to make decisions are going to be infringed upon and violated and curtailed. So, for instance, let me just ask you a hypothetical, maybe a couple
Sure.
of hypotheticals. If at the beginning of the year, I know in our school district and a lot of school districts, parents will fill out forms for their kids. So, what the transportation plan is, how the kid's getting to and from school, what their medications they're on, any food allergies, we're telling the parents all these concerns or things that these teachers don't know our kids. And yet,
Sure.
They're now charged with being with them for 8 hours a day. So what if, and on the form we fill out their legal name, and then we put what they want to be called, what their name is. So, for instance, my son's full name is Braden Leach, but he goes by Brady. Everybody calls him Brady. So in a situation where, let's say, a student's name is Susan Smith, but the name that they want to go by is John or Mark, what does a teacher do in that situation?
Yeah, under this bill, quite honestly, and I hear your concern, Chairman Leach. I think, and I think you're on to the right track of even ensuring that these parents can have the say. What I would say is this bill would call for them to call them by their name given to them on their birth certificate that's submitted. And so it's not going to limit a nickname such as Susie, but I think that is a good clarifying
So let me
point.
give you a more personal example,
Sure.
okay? My daughter, Charlotte Leach. Well, from the first day she was born, I have always called her Charlie.
Right.
That's my nickname for her, is Charlie. What if I had put on the form Charlie?
Yeah, I mean,
Are you, by way of your bill, are you telling her teacher that she cannot call her Charlie? Because Charlie is, I think, generally it's understood Charlie is a boy's, historically has been a boy's name. It's short for Charles.
Sure.
Well, that's just kind of been my cute way of calling her Charlie. Is the teacher not allowed to call her Charlie?
No, that's an interesting point, especially I think there's probably something we can do within this bill to ensure that that isn't, is that a parent's right to give a nickname to their child is not prohibited, because I agree with you. I think that would be an issue. And I think that comes down to intent as well in the name, whether it's a form that we fill out to ensure that parents get to speak into that, hey, this is what we're doing, but I'm certainly willing to work with you to ensure
So another
that.
example would be, and I think we've done the right thing, I believe very strongly we've done the right thing in keeping women out of men's sports. I think that's a good step that we in the legislature have taken to protect the integrity of our sports and to fair play and competition. I think there's disagreement up here among that, but I feel strongly we've done the right thing. But let's say in elementary school, so girls in high school and collegiate athletics cannot play football. In certain limited circumstances they have, but they typically don't. We're going to keep girls out of boys' sports in that instance. So what if a girl in elementary school wants to go play on the playground, play football with the boys? To Chairman Dutton's point, we have this loose definition of your bill of what it means to assist a child. Well, if I'm a teacher in that situation and I'm in fear of being prosecuted for assisting a child, I'm going to think twice about whether I'm going to say, well, don't play with the boys today. Let's go over here and play with the girls on the playground. What does a teacher do in that situation?
Yeah, no, so I can definitely get you the defined, after our witnesses, I'll be able to define kind of what we laid out here. Let me search through and find the exact portion, but if that is vague, I'm certainly willing to help clean that up.
So and that's my whole goal is let's be very careful with the conversation, but also about the language. And I assume that we're going to hear from a witness or two who has a story of a teacher, of an educator going against the wishes of parents. So a parent has said, my child may be struggling with, maybe she's a tomboy, maybe she's struggling, but I am working hard at home to direct my child this way. And I have a story of an educator going this way against my wishes. That is conduct that we should be, I think all of us should be very concerned about, is teachers stepping into the role of parents and overstepping their bounds. And so if that is what the goal of your bill is getting at, I'm all in. But when it comes to educators having to constantly question whether they should or should not abide by the wishes of the parents, then that's more troublesome, and we have to approach that conversation with great care and caution.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Representative Schatzline, I mean, when you define social transition, you go through associated with a person's biological sex at birth to an alternative gender identity through adoption of a different name, different pronouns, or other expressions of gender, including clothing and hairstyles. And then you say that are typically associated with biological sex opposite the person's biological sex at birth and intended to communicate the person's alternative gender identity. Does that
correct.
not clear this up in naming? If
Yeah, so I think that
if
would
I call
speak
my
to-
daughter, and the same as Maxine, and we call her Max, that's not intended to reflect she's not a girl.
That's correct.
Is
And I
that
think
correct in this?
That's correct, and Chairman, I think it would also speak to one of the concerns Chairman Leach had, which is incredibly valid. Like, if a young lady, my daughter, wanted to go play football at recess with some of her friends, this would clear it up in the sense that this is not a situation where a teacher should have to fear at all for something like that. And that's why that intent language is in there on page 1 inside of our committee sub.
All right, thank you very much for clarification. Representative Kerwin.
Yes, Representative, I just have a question. There's so many different perspectives going on right now that this bill really should just clarify that our public schools are to just teach academic instruction and not gender and social identity issues?
I agree with your sentiment wholeheartedly. This bill would not speak to that. It would only speak to the direct social transitioning of children. SB 12 is what speaks to that, but that's not the bill before us right now. Under this bill, whether I agree with it or not, this is not going to keep gender identity from being taught in the classroom. It would keep a student directly being spoken to or addressed or socially transitioned on gender ideology for their own personal life.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Schoolcraft.
Representative Schatzline, one thing I think hadn't been pointed out about your bill is after you define what social transitioning is with the intent required, what you do is you tell the school board they have the responsibility of adopting a policy to address this. So any ambiguities, et cetera, the school board would be responsible for establishing the policy. And then what's been driving me crazy about this discussion is the people talking about prosecuting teachers. There's nothing in your bill.
It would be the
that-
ISD.
Let me talk.
Go ahead.
There's nothing in your bill that addresses teachers or any responsibility. The only enforcement is the Attorney General being able to bring an action against the school district for an injunction and possibly a civil penalty. Nothing about teachers.
That's correct.
Okay.
Members, any more questions? All right, if not, we'll proceed with testimony, and we'll reserve your right to close.
Thank you, Chairman.
The chair calls Arwen Howlrain, Alberto Saucedo, and Stacy Saucedo.